we begin this pathway of opening to vulnerability by having that as our intention, that it's conscious. That the next time you're with somebody that matters to you, there's something in you that goes, oh yeah, this might, to be real, this might involve a little bit of rawness, a little bit of discomfort, embarrassment, whatever, vulnerability. When I first met my husband, when I first met Jonathan, I was really, really physically active. I had been running 5 days a week. I'd go for runs and so on. I was, I was pretty athletic and so on. Within 2 years of being together, I started getting sicker and sicker, and 2 years in, I was so sick that I was unable to do most physical activities. A lot of our bonding came around of, boogie boarding in the ocean and biking and hiking and so on. And I couldn't even walk up an incline. I was getting very immobilized. I have a connective tissue disorder, and I'm actually a lot better now, but I hit a really bad downward spiral that actually lasted about 6 years. So there I was a couple of years into this new relationship, and I wasn't the woman he married, so to speak. It was very evident to me that I wasn't going to pull out quickly. And I remember after one particular time where we had been away, really, really dropping into depression, feeling, so much of what I loved in life I was deprived of and so on. And so I kind of withdrew into myself and pulled away from him and kind of distanced from him. And we'd have conversations about what was going on, and he would try to offer really good advice. And that, of course, the fixing made me insanely judgmental. And so I'd get down on him and then down on myself. So it was a really difficult period. So I remember at one point being we have a hammock, and I was swinging on it, and I was recognizing how cut off I felt and depressed, and the self-judgment, and that you'll notice rain, which is really tea with Mara. It's like recognizing what's happening. I see you, Mara, letting it be there, and then having tea, really investigating and nurturing. Those of you that are unfamiliar, RAIN's an acronym that really helps us have tea with Mara. RAIN, when the recognizing is, you just get it. I got it from myself with recognizing, okay, depression, self-judgment, distancing. And then the A of RAIN's allow, okay, just let it be there. And I realized I needed to stay. I felt bad enough that it wasn't working to do my control strategy of withdraw or judge or anything. I needed to stay. So then I began to investigate. That's the I of RAIN. That's when we're really having tea. It's like if you're getting to know a friend, you start saying, okay, what's really going on? So I started asking myself that. And what I found out in investigating is that I was really ashamed of being sick. That in some way it made me feel like I was less than, that something was really wrong with me as a human, that I was sick, I wasn't doing sickness well. And I also felt this vulnerability that I was no longer an attractive, appealing mate. I was no fun. I was the opposite of fun. I was really a drag, So in the investigating, I got in touch with really the essence of Mara for me at those moments, was a feeling of vulnerability and fear that I'd be rejected. This man I loved, but I was going to be rejected. So that had that quality of ouch. I was real suffering. And then I asked a question I often ask to get to the N of RAIN, which is nurturing, which is, how does this place want me to be with it? And clearly what this part of me that was feeling ashamed and vulnerable needed was me to offer care inside. So I put my hand on my heart, and I do what I often do, which is, it's okay, sweetheart, just a real kindness and just sensing loving energy from inside and around me, just washing through me. The more, and this is a comment, the more you get in touch with the suffering, the more powerful the nurturing. In other words, if you really contact the vulnerability, you'll find that you can then be very nurturing. And I was feeling a lot of vulnerability. So the more that I offered care, the more there was a sense of space and tenderness. And rather than being caught in that vulnerable, rejectable self, I had kind of reopened to a spacious presence that was kind-hearted towards myself. And I knew I needed to then share with Jonathan what was going on. But that brought up a wave of real vulnerability. And it took probably, in my whole life, it was one of the most courageous things for me to be willing to stay with that vulnerability and share with him, this is what's happening. And of course, what it did is when one person is vulnerable, the other person is free to be able to express from their vulnerability. So he could then share how powerless he felt and how scared he felt, and how hard it was to love me but not be able to help me. And it was probably one of the deepest bonding experiences we've had, which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been willing to have tea with Mara, be with that vulnerability. So for me, it was one of the most powerful teachings about the pathway to love is being willing to stay with the vulnerability. And we got married soon after, and we built into our wedding ceremony, vows that had to do with being real in that way. And I'll read you, one was a quote from Rilke, and it says, "I want to unfold. Let no place in me hold itself closed, for where I am closed, I am false. I want to stay clear in your sight."